Good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is July the 22nd, 1985. I just felt those tears coming as I started to say that, because that was a day that I never thought I would stand up here and say that I'm very grateful for. That was the day I had my last drink. What it was like. When people ask me to speak, all of a sudden, the last 69 years of my life are flashing in front of me. And definitely there's some anxiety that goes along with that. And that's fueled by that fear that I'm not going to be good enough, and all of those old messages that it took for me to drink. That was it. I remember when I left rehab, they said, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I thought, okay, I'll do that, and then I'll graduate. And I says, you want me to go to those meetings and talk in front of people without having a drink? And tonight I stand up here and I do feel very comfortable about it. Someone told me, and I've got to do that, whenever you speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, if that fear crops into you, breathe in God and blow out your ego. And I've had to remember that, because I'm not being judged here. You've all accepted me for who I am. And I tried to avoid who I was for many, many, many years. I was born to a wonderful middle-class family. When I was 9 months old, my father moved and the family to California once again. And he also got out of the Army, and he got to come home from Okinawa because of me. I missed being a baby boomer by 1 month, though. So I'm one of those traditionalists, I guess, when they talk about age. But so I was raised in California. My father and mother were in the dry cleaning business, and my father was fun. My father loved to stop in bars, and he had in his dry cleaning business, he had a lot of people living in Hollywood and Beverly Hills, and he'd take me on his dry cleaning route. And on the way back, we'd stop at Chasen's. I don't know if any of you are old enough to ever have heard of that place in Beverly Hills that closed down, and the Brown Derby. And he'd take me in there, and I would see all of these pretty women with men all around him in the middle of the afternoon. And I recall at about age 5, I thought, that's going to be me. That was my aspiration. I was going to be able to hang out in the bars and have lots of men around me. You've got to watch when you ask for something, because it usually will happen. It's part of the journey that God sent me on. I was raised in a family that when they entertained and on Thanksgiving and things like that I was offered to taste a glass of wine. I was offered to taste a beer. I didn't like any of it. When all my friends were getting drunk in high school and things like that, I avoided alcohol. It wasn't anything for me. I didn't have to sneak. I ended up being the designated driver. When did all of a sudden I decided at one point in my life, and I got married, the first husband, when I was 19 years old. We bought a 6-pack of beer, and it'd last us almost a month. We'd have a beer piece, on Saturday night. And then we returned. We had gone away to the East for 6 months right after our marriage. And I got a job in Silicon Valley in San Jose, California. Now, I'll tell you, those engineers that you're looking at your computers today, those engineers that were designing all that, they were drinkers. And I fell into a world that I felt very comfortable in. It was every Friday night. I ended up getting a divorce because I really had not experienced some of that kind of fun. And so I would go out on the Friday nights with everyone and drink. And there was always this comment that, gee, she sure can hold her liquor. I had a wooden leg. I really did. I used to play, chug-a-lug games with all the engineers. They would run back to the office and write notes to themselves because they'd go into blackouts. So, because they might have thought of something, one of those genius type things that were going on in Silicon Valley in those days. So, that was the beginning of it, and I seemed to be okay in a lot of respects. I was enjoying a single life. I was separated, and this is back in the late 60s, and all of a sudden I find out that I'm pregnant. I had been separated from my husband. In 1967, women didn't have babies without being married, so I went back to him, and that marriage wasn't very successful. I found that I still like the fun life. And so we eventually ended up divorced. Alcohol caused me to find someone else. When we talk in the big book about geographics, well, I wasn't that. I just changed husbands. That was my solution. Well, we'll get rid of that one. He doesn't understand that I want to have a good time. And so what did I do? I started having some fun with the boss, who was married. And I had this new little boy, and I had left when my son was about 8 months, 9 months old. And I ended up having a wonderful relationship. This man was a genius. He was responsible for the design of metal on silicone. He was going to give me a life that I always thought would be neat. I had a lot of fantasies. When I was a kid, I was going to have the big house, the swimming pool, a bar. In the 60s, when you were buying a house, you made sure that it had a bar. And he offered me all of this, and he left his wife, and we ended up getting married, and I have a beautiful gift from that marriage, and that's Kit. I'm very grateful for that. I have a son from the first one, so I had little souvenirs. Well, I got, tired of this. It was, that wasn't that fun that I saw when I was 5 years old. Now I had a nanny that would come in. I was able to quit working. My husband encouraged me to drink. We had charge accounts at the liquor store. They would deliver it, everything. And I thought, well, this is the life. But then I got bored with it. It wasn't neat enough. And so the nanny would come over in the afternoon with the kids, and I found myself back in the bars. And in those days, the bars were pretty nice, some of them, that a regular crowd hung out with. And I'd had Kit, and she was doing okay, and so was my son and everything, and trying to keep a nice life for him. And my husband, as I said, encouraged me to drink. And he'd call and he'd say, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sitting by the swimming pool having a margarita or whatever I felt like making, and this is at 12 o'clock in the afternoon." We did a lot of partying in that when we were married, a lot of entertaining, and it was, starting to catch up with me, and I would start drinking at noon. And then, as I said, I got bored with shopping, because that's what I did also. I had that addiction. And so I started hanging out again in the local bars in Los Gatos, California, and Saratoga, wherever I can find it. And one night I was at a party at 5:30 in the afternoon in my neighborhood, and my girlfriend, I fell down the stairs. She says, "Nancy, you're drunk." I said, "Yes, I am drunk." And she says, "When did you start drinking?" I said, "At noon." She says, "You can't do that." And I go, "Why not?" She says, "Because then if you start, you can't drink before 5 o'clock or you're an alcoholic." And I said, "Really?" So I didn't know anything about it. And she came over every day for about a month with her little kids at noon, and we played cards by the swimming pool and with our children. And I didn't have a drink until 5 o'clock. Therefore, I'm not an alcoholic, So I pretty much stuck to that. The thing is that my second husband, Bill, the wonderful genius that he was in everything, was truly an alcoholic, blackout alcoholic. He was a member of Mensa, all of these types of things. But that was his liquid courage, and that's, he didn't make me the alcoholic. It was just kind of fun. I got really tired of his alcoholism because he'd pass out at parties and he was no longer fun. So I decided I'd better go and find some other people and move on, because we're going to get rid of this one, but you make sure you have another one before you leave this one. And, I hung out this place in Los Gatos. It was called the Hacienda, and it was very popular. It had a wonderful piano bar. A lot of you are too young to know what a piano bar was, but we'd sit around there at night, a grand piano, stools. You just would listen to the wonderful music. You'd ask for songs. And this place was some place that was very special to my family. They, had both of my rehearsal dinners at that place, and just my graduation dinner, all these kinds of things. And so I started going back to my hacienda. And before long, I knew that my marriage wasn't going to work out. And my son had been hit by a car. He was visiting his father. And I was hanging out a lot more at the hospital. And then after that, I would go over to the hacienda, and I met these wonderful men, absolutely wonderful. They were Italians, and I just kind of embarrasses my husband, and some of the things, but it was a wonderful men. I met all their wives too. That didn't matter, and they became the people that I hung out with at the piano bar. And I also knew that I had to be a lady at all times, and I also knew that I couldn't let on what was going on when their wives were around, and be very respectful. I was looking up what happened to them, because they were one of the bunches out in California in the 70s. There's a couple TV movies about that family. And when my son got hit by the car, my ex-husband was not very nice to me. And one night he came to visit our son with his wife, and she said something, and I didn't like what she said. And remember, this is the day of the hot pants, and I'm also popping a few of the pills that doctors prescribe for you to keep you skinny. And so I was, up and all this, and I'd go to the hospital, I'd dress to the nines in my hot pants and all of that, kind of showing off and doing that. And I didn't like what his wife said to me about my son, and my ex-husband kicked me with a steel-toe boot. And so I went to the hacienda that night, and I pointed it out to him. And the next day, the CEO of the hospital came and greeted me, and this was a Catholic hospital, and he told me that he had talked to some people last night, and he heard what happened, and he says, I want you to know that your ex-husband has only a couple hours a day that he's allowed to come in, and you won't be there either, at the time. So they took care of that. They took me off to an attorney. So I decided this was going to be my life, and I let my husband know, who was alcoholic, that I no longer wanted to be married to him. I broke his heart. I really did. I broke his heart. And he finally moved out, and my son he was in the hospital for a month, and I had this other life going on. I had a full-time nanny living with me, so my children wouldn't be, in any type of turmoil. And this way I could drink, I could have a good time, and look for my next husband. And when my son got out of the hospital, and then he got out of a body cast after a couple months, he was in the hospital for a month and in a body cast for a month. I had to teach him to walk again, and he was almost 7 years old, 6 years old. My parents had moved from the San Jose area up to a resort community, and they bought a resort, so I took my son up there thinking this would be a great place for him to heal, learn to walk, and it'd be on a lake. And so every weekend I'd do this. But I'd get there, and my mother, the grandmother, would gladly watch my two children, and my parents had a bar in their restaurant and in this resort, and then I just go out at night and continue to have a good time. And drinking, I was still able to hold that, you know. I remember standing one night, I got pretty drunk, and I took off a beautiful wedding ring that my second husband had given me. We were skipping rocks, and I thought that'd be fun to skip that rock too, you know. Somewhere, there's a gorgeous diamond at the bottom of Clear Lake, California. But, you know, I didn't think anything of things like that. That wasn't abnormal. And I was walking out of this back bar one evening, one of the weekends that I was up there, and there was this guy in a swimming pool in his underwear, and he would swim for drinks. You know, I truly believe today that God puts people together, because I found myself another good drunk, and that's the man that I've been married to. That was 41 years ago. And he asked if he could buy me a drink, and yeah, why not, you know? And he was my soulmate, I found out, because I talked to him more about anything than I'd ever talked to anyone else about. Right from the very beginning. I didn't know that I would end up with him. Well, anyway, we started dating, and that's the rest of it is so much of Dick's story. And next thing I knew, I sold my house in San Jose, and I moved up to the Clear Lake area with my children. And I was controlling my drinking, but I'd have a lot of good times and everything. I, you know, would have to go back to San Jose for a lot of different things and that. But Dick and I were in a solid relationship. I was going to live with him. I wouldn't marry him. I'd had 2 unsuccessful marriages, and I wasn't going to get married. I was just going to shack up. So, I never used that term. So I moved into his house. There's a lot of little things that went on in between that. And he had a lovely ex-wife who had to move out of the house when I moved in. And that was quite chaotic, you know. The very first night he asked me if I'd like one of his etchings. You know, I got a painting. This guy's going to give me one of the oil paintings, you know. So he drank, I drank, but I didn't know that this man was an alcoholic. And as I said, it's Dick's story, but 2 years into our relationship, something happened. And that, as I said, he took me out. I was leaving him because it was pretty bad. And he took me out and he bought me a bottle of wine. He took a sip of it and he said, "Nancy, this is the last drink I'm ever going to have." And to this day, that was the last drink that he took 39 years ago. So I think he was sober about 6 months, and I immediately went to Al-Anon. I heard about Al-Anon, and when he quit drinking, and I'd go to these meetings, and it's not the Al-Anon that I know today. I'm a member of Al-Anon also, and I need tune-ups quite often. But I went to Al-Anon, and the Al-Anon that I went to, they were talking about their alcoholic, and they were telling their alcoholic where their alcoholic was hiding their booze. They weren't, you know, talking about themselves. It wasn't the Al-Anon that today that we know so well. And I stored that information. Believe me, I stored those hiding places up here in my long-term memory. And I came home from Al-Anon, and as I said, Dick has his own story, but he'd say, "What did you learn at Al-Anon?" And I'd say, "Fix me a Manhattan and I'll tell you." He'd fix me a Manhattan, I'd sit down and I'd say, if you drink ever again, I'm out of here. You know, that was my standard answer. So I did marry him, and he provided, you know, this man was changing in front of me. He provided a wonderful life for me and my children. My children got interested through him in snow ski racing, and he made sure that these kids had every advantage to make the Olympic team if they were that good. And I thank him to this day for those things. But what happened is he became a workaholic, and no longer was he drunk. And I didn't like what was going on, so guess where I found my refuge? In a drink. And we moved to the state of Washington, and that was really, I said, okay, well, when I get there, I'm not going to drink. And I had switched to wine by then. And this was in 1979, and he bought us a house up in the snow so the kids could ski. And do all these things. And I just, for some reason, I don't know what pain I was hiding, but my alcoholism took off. And by probably 1982, it was full blown because there was 3 pretty bad years for my family. I was paranoid that someone was going to find out truly how much I drank. So remember those Al-Anon meetings? I found suitcases to hide the bottles in. We had a wonderful full basement, my laundry room, my office was down there. File cabinets, you can file, empty bottles there. The big box of soap said. The upright piano, nobody was playing it, so I put the bottles in there. And, this is going on, but then I had to dispose of them. And when we remodeled the house that we bought, the trash compactors were real common in the 70s to put in your houses, late 70s, 80s. And I go into them, I says, will that KitchenAid trash compactor break one of those giant jugs of Gallo wine? And they said yes. I wanted them to demonstrate it, but it did. It broke it up real nice, and it looked so pretty. It was green and all this stuff in there. Well, there was starting to be a lot of wine bottles and things like that, and I figured if he opened the trash compactor and the kids, they're going to find out, what's all this green glass? And so I thought, okay, where am I going to put it? We had high bank, 90 acres on Puget Sound, and so I decided that it was going to be okay for me to throw my bottles over the high bank. And a few years later, after I'd been throwing bottles there, Dick decided that he wanted to move a tree because it blocked the view from our bed of Mount Rainier. And he's saying, go lie down on the bed, Nancy. And he says, can you see the mountain? And I said, yes, couldn't see the mountain. Who cared, And I said, you're going to hurt yourself. Well, I was worried he's going to run into all those green bottles. So I couldn't trust that he's not going to be doing things. So now I start wiping my fingerprints off of the bottles and disposing of them next door. Don't anyone ever talk about cocaine paranoia. I got that way with my alcohol bottles. It's probably, I put more work into taking these bottles and getting rid of them, then box wine too, those bladders. When I got sober and he found all those empty bladders out of the boxes, he says, my God. But I'd wipe my fingerprints off, put them in brown bags, and go to the shopping centers in the morning and drop them in, because I didn't want anyone to know how much I was drinking. When I'd leave and go up with the kids to the ski cabin, it was just like open. I could drink. And I didn't think the kids were going to ever come back and report on me, But so by now, I'm putting it in my coffee in the morning. I found Bailey's Irish Cream. It's really good in the afternoon. It's like a milkshake. I absolutely knew that this disease was getting away from me, but I didn't think of it as a disease. All I wanted to do was learn once again how to drink like a lady. We would come back, we'd leave on Thanksgiving Eve and move the kids up to the cabin for their ski racing, and they had a tutor and things like that. And Dick would go back to Olympia, and I'd stay up there, and it just got worse and worse with me drinking. And when I came back in the year 1985, for that spring, I was really into the morning drinking and everything, and I didn't know how I was going to maintain. I got really dressed up one day, and I went downstairs and prepared myself and got all my bottles, and I decided I was going to find the recycle center. And I went in there with bags of wine bottles, and they weighed them, and I was going to a luncheon with a bunch of ladies, and the man said to me, ma'am, that's 10 pounds, here's your 10 cents. You know, I believe truly in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and when it says we stood at a turning point, we asked God with complete abandon. I looked at this man when he tried to give me my 10 cents for my 10 pounds of bottles, which isn't really that many, but it was a couple days worth. And I said, thank you, keep your effing dime. See, I always wanted that facade that I was a woman, and I wouldn't do that kind of talk. You know, I was a lady, and I wouldn't talk like that. And I drove out of there, and I thought, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. For 2 years, in the mid-'80s, there was a lot of commercials about, are you an alcoholic? And they do the test on the television screen. And Dick would come to me and he'd say, come here and take this test. And I said, you take it for me and tell me what I am. And you know, he just, all of a sudden, he backed off. There was a time, I love to do this because it embarrasses him. We came back from the ski cabin that year to return to home, and the kids go back in school, and he came to me very nicely and he says, honey, maybe you wouldn't drink as much. You look at him, he's over there. You wouldn't drink as much if I bought you some of your favorite fine wines. And I said, oh, that sounds great. So he went to the liquor store. He got me my French Muscadet and my Pouilly Foussé. The names, brand names really mattered, you know. And so he'd come in off of the property. He was developing that 90 acres. And he'd come in and he'd pour himself a Pepsi Cola, and we'd sit in the formal living room, and he'd pour me a nice crystal glass of wine, and dinner'd be started, and all of a sudden, you know, he'd watch me kind of drink. Well, I'd say, excuse me, I got a laundry load downstairs. And I'd go down there and have my 3-liter jug of wine going like this, and I'd come back upstairs, and we're at dinner, and he says, I watched her. She only had 1.5 glasses of wine. And I was drunk out of my mind. These two over here were I don't know, I can't say they were my enablers, but they did take care of me. And we had those rules in our household. Don't talk, don't feel, don't tell anyone about mom. You know, beautiful glass house, but we're not going to tell anyone about me. I wasn't the most wonderful alcoholic either. You know, at the end it had taken over, the moods would change, and I'd pull some Joan Crawford, Mommy Dearest moments and things like that, and it wasn't pleasant, and I've made my amends, and I don't do that anymore, which was very important. My son was graduating in May of 1985. He had done quite well in his skiing. He wanted to go off to a college where he could continue skiing, and he was like number 48 in a class of almost 400 students, something to be very proud of. And that year, my daughter was graduating from 8th grade and had been accepted. We knew that she had been accepted to the Sun Valley ski team, which was quite an honor to be there, and as an A skier at her age. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. I'm going to move to a strange town and all of this as soon as school starts again. And in May, I had been praying since that day with the 10 pounds of bottles to get the courage to say those words, that I'm an alcoholic. And I prayed to God, and I went to church with my kids on Sunday, and it was a beautiful church on Steamboat Island, and there was a man there. It was an Episcopal church, and he got up in front of the whole parish, and the parish honored him for having so many years of sobriety. And I didn't know what that was about, but everybody, and he told a little bit of his story and his gratitude. And so all these seeds and things were coming to me, and I was realizing, you know, this is that turning point with complete abandon, you know. The night that my son graduated from high school, and that I didn't recognize that my daughter had graduated from 8th grade. You know, there was a big crisis in the family. I don't know if any of you ever saw, I think it's 16 Candles, where the parents are so absolutely involved with the older sister getting married and they forget her effing birthday. Well, this is what Kit was saying. She knew about 16 Candles. And I crawled into bed that night. My parents were there. Before I could go to my son's graduation, I found myself in the basement. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I know there's pictures in that photo box somewhere. My face was bloated. It was awful. It was awful. And I had to drink. I had to drink. Woo! And so that night, when I crawled into bed, I said, Dick, I'm an alcoholic. Yep, yeah. I am so grateful for that night. And I can't look at him because he's crying, and then I cry. Well, the next day, we were finding me a place to go. And there was one little thing that was going to stand in the way. You know, I like to be social, and we had a party planned for the 4th of July. That was going to be a party that people came and spent the night on the 3rd of July, and we always would have this big 4th of July party. And my family all knew, and there was a bed waiting for me for the 22nd of July at the Betty Ford Center. And they were very worried about me, that I was going to get drunk and do something, because by now the blackouts had started. I was, thinking I was okay. They'd find me under the table on the phone to Europe, at 3 o'clock in the morning, because I thought that was normal. I'd call my girlfriend there. And they'd also find me maybe in a bush. They tell me this, I don't remember. But I was real good at this party. I did not get drunk, but when everyone left the next day on the 4th of July, I found all the wine glasses that I had, champagne glasses that I'd put down and forgot where they were, and I drank every one of them. And they told me they found me on the deck, and there was a lot of fear that I'd go close to the high bank and fall over. And I was ready. I was truly ready to go to treatment after that. But first of all, all those excuses came in. When Dick made the phone call, they told him that I would need to phone, because if I didn't admit myself, it would be considered an intervention, and I would have to go to detox and do all these things. So I phoned, and I had to face the reality and tell him how much I was drinking a day. And I said, just one of those big gallon jugs. I had it hidden everywhere, and I was drinking a lot more than that. And so everything got put into place. My husband and my daughter put me on an airplane. I really thought that I was different than my husband and his alcoholism, and my second husband and his alcoholism, and all sorts of other people. I thought that I was going to be going off to this treatment center. I'd heard of one of Dick's engineers that had worked for him on the land development in California, that he went to a treatment center where they gave him booze. That was the aversion therapy. But I didn't know that they was also given, so I thought they were going to teach me how to drink. I didn't understand any of this because I hadn't been introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. The only time that I ever talked to Alcoholics Anonymous was when no one else would accept my phone calls anymore. And then I'd call them and their hotline, and I'd say, yeah, I'll be at a meeting in the morning. And that was, that wasn't too long before I finally did admit it, though. So I thought they were going to teach me to drink like a lady, and Dick knew differently and everything, and they put me on the airplane in Seattle, and I had to stop at a couple places, and so I remember the mimosa that morning to stop the shakes, because I drank till 3 o'clock that night before. And then I remember that, I got off of the plane in San Jose, California, and I called, and my daughter was so concerned that I was not going to get back on that airplane. And I remember her telling me, Mom, get back on that airplane. You don't need to talk to us. And I did. I got back on the airplane. The funniest thing is when you're going off to treatment on July the 22nd to Palm Desert, California, and it's 120 degrees, there's nobody on the plane. You know, this lady in front of me, I just love this story. She turned around to me and she says, do you have family in Palm Springs? I go, no. She says, have you ever been here before? No. Do you have plans when you get there? No. You know, and so, I'd ordered a beer in the afternoon on that last leg of the flight, and finally this lady turns around and she started asking me, I says, I'm going to the Betty Ford Center. Well, you know that look they get on their face of absolute terror and everything. She never said anything. The cart comes around, I says, I'll have a Rainier beer. That was my last drink. And they're sitting there and they're looking between the crack to see what I look like with this beer. You know, I was scared to arrive, totally inebriated, but when I got there, they told me I needed to be detoxed. That was also my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got in the car, you know, that was so funny because they said, we'll be in red, white, and blue, the people that are picking you up. My God, they got these smocks on with the great big Eisenhower diamonds, and, you know, I'm sure everybody at the airport knew who they were picking up, you know, and things like that. But I get in the back of the station wagon, they're driving me, this wonderful man and woman, and I'm saying, will we get there in time for cocktail hour? And, you know, the guy looks at me and says, and this is Bob Hope's house up here in this corner, you know. Okay, all right. So they never answered me that, and I was teased by him for many years because I did, besides Alcoholics Anonymous, I did some things with the center after I got sober. I found out I wasn't going to drink there. They weren't going to give me a drink and teach me how to drink like a lady. I sat in a fetal position one day crying. Just bring me one glass of wine. There was all of these things that were leading up to whatever happened, if it was spiritual or something like that. You know, I did a first step. I didn't know what it really accomplished for me. Today, whenever I'm working with another alcoholic, I say, what did step one accomplish for you? I'm powerless and my life's unmanageable. And, you know, I came to realize through the sponsors and things that I had, because the sponsor, when I got back to where I was going to be moving to Sun Valley, I picked a wonderful sponsor. And we started all over with the steps. And, treatment steps are not the real thing. And I said, well, I don't need to start with step one. And she says, yes, you do. And, you know, this is back in 1985, and there were a lot of wonderful step meetings. There was a lot of big book meetings. They told me I really did not want to do one thing that was recommended, and they told me that I needed to go to women's meetings. I said, what? And I said, I don't need, you know. Well, I found out. I couldn't baffle the women with my brilliance and dazzle them with my BS. So, and that was, what's his name, that quote that said that. And so I started going to women's meetings, and there were women there that said, let us love you until you can love yourself. Oh my God, I thought, what a bunch of self-centered women they are. But it was these women who taught me how to find Nancy through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I came here to Alcoholics Anonymous thinking I was terminally unique. You know, that this disease did not affect anyone else the way that it affected me. I didn't think anyone in these rooms would ever be able to relate to me because I was different. I was a victim. And I found out you're a victim once, and after that you volunteer. And that's what I had done, and I buried those feelings and those things. I had been sexually abused when I was younger. I had got myself involved with some very shady characters at that La Hacienda. And then, as I said, I'll never forget the day that I went in and introduced Dick and said, this is who I'm going to go off with. I was pretty well being taken care of by then, and they welcomed him. Also, one of them just got out of prison that same day. And that's part of his story on his fear of meeting my friends. But I reflect back on these things and my life. And I today have had the promises happen for me. I just told you my deepest, darkest secrets that nobody knew. And when I decided at 4 years sober that I wanted to become a professional in the field of alcoholism and drugs, Dick encouraged me, and I went off to a well-known treatment center and did a year of schooling, and then they hired me. But these are the things that led up to this. During my first 4 years of going to Alcoholics Anonymous, there's many people that crossed my path, many people in that last edition of the Big Book. I was very fortunate. I sat on a Sunday morning meeting. I was so mad at God when I was about 2 years sober, because some man who was in our AA group had died the night before of esophageal hemorrhage. And I didn't understand why God would let somebody die from that. Well, that was his self-will. From drinking of all those times, he hadn't healed yet. And it just happened, and he was home alone. But I went to this meeting, and there was a very famous, and I'm not breaking this man's anonymity because he's public about it, very famous astronaut that really took the time and the patience and explained to me God's will versus self-will. And I was just eating so many of these things up. By the time I was a couple years sober, they put me right in as the assistant GSR. The next thing, I'm the GSR, and I'm down in, as I call, Double Drips, Idaho, which is Twin Falls. I'm down there with all these men that own potato farms, and they are the whole district and all this, and they said, we want you to be the chairman as the new GSR up in Sun Valley of a conference we're going to have the convention for. And I said, there's one thing I have as a request. And I said, I've never heard a woman be the keynote speaker. I will be the chair of this if I can find a woman to be the keynote speaker. And they let me. But that was just, kind of no. I did what was told, and and by my sponsor, and I talked about everything that I could to get the help that I needed to stay sober. I didn't do just 90 meetings in 90 days. I went to 120, and I kept track of it because I thought I'd graduate. I didn't want to graduate. I absolutely loved it. The first AA meeting that I walked into in Sun Valley, this wonderful couple came up to me afterwards and asked me if I'd like to go for coffee. And I was shocked. Why would strangers want to have me go for coffee? Well, this was a man who died after he'd had 50 years. Tom might even know him. He spoke in San Diego at that conference. They were from Tucson, Arizona. And we kept in touch with him. And she helped me, and he helped Dick understand a lot of the things about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a hard time accepting a lot of things about people, and I was fortunate enough to take Dr. Paul and Max out to lunch one day and show them around Sun Valley. And I said, all right, Mr. and Mrs. Acceptance, how do I accept this? And they looked at me and they said, it's very simple. You have to accept the person. You don't have to approve. And I'm very grateful for that they gave me that. When I left Sun Valley to go into the profession of drug and alcohol counseling, AA taught me how to handle sobriety. Author Bob P. came up at my going away party, and he said, Nancy, don't ever forget your humble beginnings. Yeah, I'm only 4 years sober. What do you mean, my humble beginnings? He says, I've seen too many women and men go through the path that you're going to enter into that forget about Alcoholics Anonymous. And those words today are right in the forefront of my mind. Those are engraved. You know, I wouldn't have had this life. You know, I'm grateful for what I do. I love what I do, but it's not. That's my profession. Alcoholics Anonymous is where I just can tell you what it was like, what happened, and encourage you to keep coming. The journey is unbelievable. You know, I was finally able to, with a good, thorough inventory of myself, forgive myself, make amends to a perpetrator that I got a lot of miles of victimhood out of, and just was able to own my part of being a trusting, innocent little girl. I was able to make amends to my second husband, who I broke his heart. He died at age 55 of alcoholism. I was able to make amends to him. When he died, my daughter went and was going through his stuff, and she found a letter, and she says, I didn't know that you ever wrote a letter to my dad owning your part. And I blamed him for a lot of things, that I wouldn't be alcoholic if he hadn't encouraged me to drink. But I was bound to have this disease. It was in the family. I made a letter of amends to my first husband and set myself free there. I believe these steps are written in order, and you have to do them in order. When I have tried to move on in my life, when I first got here, to another step, and I struggled with that step, it most likely meant that I had never completed that step prior to that, especially step 3. Then I went to step 4. You know, it's so simple, and I tried to complicate it, and today it still is so simple. I know what step 1 did for me. First of all, it doesn't start with I, it starts with we, and I have each one of you. And to this day, I still count on the we of this program. It broke through my denial. It made me open and ready for something greater than myself. I said if I admitted I was powerless over one more thing in my life, yeah, I just couldn't do that. But when somebody said, try it, step 2 will empower you. When I let God into my life, I was empowered. Today, I'm not a needlepoint picture with all those knots in the back of it. I can look at it and I can say, Nancy, that's who I am. And I didn't want to be me. I didn't want to be in my skin. And I'm very grateful to all of you. I hope somebody got something out of this. Thank you.